Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Greetings of peace, everyone. My name is Grace Song. I'm the executive director of the Usuli Institute, and I'm so excited to be here with my dear friend Wietske Merison today. We are going to talk about music, and so we just finished something incredible. I'm so excited. I don't know if you are watching this, if you've already heard the music, but we just finished an incredible recording session yesterday. Wietske has now completed her first album. We're getting ready to release it. And, I really wanted to have a conversation about your music, about your background, about, the role of music in this tradition. We are both Muslim converts, and I'm a convert of 28 years. Wietske and I had a previous conversation in the summer, which was a talk about the Muslim convert experience. I introduced Wietske and our other friend Joe, two exceptional converts who had incredible gifts, and Wietske played some of her music for us back then. You can find it on our YouTube channel. But when we met with Wietske this summer, we heard her divine music, and it became a religious duty for me, honestly, to do everything that I could to help record, preserve, share, elevate this incredible gift that you have, and see, or demonstrate to people that, Islam and music are, fully compatible, that music is a way to reach the divine. And, as a Muslim, I'm so proud to see, and so touched to see songs that elevate something Islamic and beautiful. And I think most people have not seen that, heard that, experienced it. And so I wanted to share those songs and talk about, what went into it. So I wanted to start, because it's, hard to, if you've never heard the music, let's start by hearing something that is truly divine, the call to prayer, which you've done at the Usuli Institute and which we recorded, and I hope people will, hear all around the world. So could you please play the call to prayer?
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Hayya ala salah. Hayya ala salah. Hayya ala al-falah. Hayya ala al-falah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah.
So amazing. Can you tell us about that piece?
Yeah, sure. So This is the call to prayer that is ritually performed before going into prayer to make sure everyone gathers for the prayer. And I mean, the first times I performed the call to prayer is just as a part of that ritual, right? So for me, the first times I actually got to call the call to prayer, the Adhan, was when I was praying together with my girlfriends. And I think it was during Ramadan, like our month of fasting, when usually a lot of Muslims do more prayers during the night than during other months of the year. So I gathered with a group of my friends, and we did the prayers, and then we also called the Adhan. Because, I mean, in most common settings, it's usually the men who call the Adhan. So as a woman, there's not that many opportunities to call the prayer. And, I mean, as a result of that, many women don't really know how to call the prayer or how to call the Adhan. So I actually didn't know, but one of my friends did. And then the time afterward, she was like, okay, now you do it, right? So then I did it. And there was something very, very beautiful about just having that space to explore together, to worship together, and to be an active participant in that form of worship, and to hear your girlfriend's voices and to really be there together. So that was my first experience with calling the Adhan. I then came to visit you at Usuli, and you asked me to do the Adhan. And that was absolutely frightening to me. So I think I first kindly rejected, saying, no, I'll listen to the beautiful adhans that are always being called. And to be honest, part of that relates to, I think, this immense pressure that, at least to me, was very much tied to this idea of conversion. So this idea that, okay, if I'm gonna be Muslim, then I need to be a perfect Muslim. Then I need to do it all right, which is silly, and I cannot even fully rationalize the thought for myself. Like, why would I need that? I cannot get there, but the feeling is still real, right? So it's sort of like I came late to the party. Now I gotta gotta make up for that. Gotta show that I really am Muslim as well, right? I need to prove myself or something. Which is silly. That's just, it's silly.
It's so classic.
But sometimes it's good to express these things, right? So you see how silly it is. So one of my things with the Adhan was like, but I'm not going to be able to do it perfectly, right? And it needs to be perfect, especially if I, as a convert, I'm going to do it as a convert, and then as a woman, and all of these extra layers of pressure, thinking, well, then I really need to do it very well to prove that I am worthy to do this. And actually, this is why I really like this recording of the Adhan, because it's not perfect. It's not perfect. There's a little moment where my Arabic slips a bit, right? It's not a major mistake, right? It doesn't change meaning, but it's not perfect. And none of us are perfect. But that doesn't mean that we cannot engage in worship, and that doesn't mean that we cannot have that connection and participate in the rituals. And I think that's why actually this Adhan, why I wanted to keep this recording and not do it again, even though I feel like I could have maybe tried to reach for perfection more. But it's okay to not.
Well, this is one of these things where I think the artist is coming out, because I've definitely experienced the artist perfection, right? You actually can hear the little things that you would have liked to have done better. They're not perfect, but for someone like me who just, I was so, just overtaken by the sheer power of the experience of hearing it. Like, I wouldn't have a trained ear to know if there was any imperfection at all, but what struck me was just the beauty of it, and so, and I completely understand, because I think for Muslim converts, in general, like the idea that you're late to the party, and that, everybody else kind of knows what's going on, and you're just trying to make your way. That's like so, I think it's typical of that experience, and it affects kind of everything about how you operate. But I think that, like this music just, when we talk about it being a vehicle for, reaching the divine and feeling something else, like that just, it doesn't matter about the little imperfections. It's that emotion. It's what it elicits in people. So it's just beautiful. So you and I actually went this weekend to watch a classical music concert, and you asked we had an opportunity to do a Q&A with the artist who was playing violin, and you asked him a question, which I'm going to now ask you.
Oh, God.
So you said that your grandmother always said, you come from a family of musicians, and that your grandmother always said that there's a point when a person or a child, engages with music, and that music starts to speak to them, whether it's through a story or through, something. So just wondering if you can tell us about when that moment was, if you remember it, when the music started speaking to you, and also just share about your background, so people know, like Wietske the musician.
Of course, no. Yeah, so I have the immense privilege to have grown up in a family where I got the chance to engage with music as a kid. So my mom is a flutist, my dad is a jazz musician who plays several instruments, and from a really young age they let me know that I was gonna get the chance to choose which instrument I want to play. And I knew all along I wanted to play the violin. There was a little bit of a moment of doubt, but that was overcome, and I chose the violin, and I started my lessons. I don't remember whether I was 4 or 5, but 4 or 5. So really young. And at first, I think I'm really grateful that my parents had the patience to sit with me and sit me down, let me do my practice rounds, because let's be honest, a starting violinist doesn't sound good, especially not a 4 to 5-year-old starting violinist. So that was by the mercy of my parents and my neighbors. But yeah, so first you have this phase of just struggling with the notes, trying to learn this script and figuring out what it means. And I had stickers on my violin that indicated where my fingers needed to be, and then I learned, okay, so the red sticker, that is this note on the sheet music, right? And slowly you start to get through that phase where it feels more natural. So you start to intuitively putting your finger down as soon as you see the note. So you get to a phase where you're more comfortable with the notes, and you get to a space where you can think more about, okay, so what does it mean, and what does it do to me? What does it do to the audience? What did the composer mean by this? And I remember there was one really important moment for me, which was I was practicing. My dad was sitting with me, and he was playing along on the piano. And it was this violin concerto. And of course, I'm not actually very knowledgeable when it comes to classical music, so I don't remember whose concerto it is. I just remember the line, because I struggled to play this line on the violin because I didn't see it as a sentence. I couldn't remember it. It were just loose notes to me. And my dad thought it would be helpful for me to understand or feel the music more, to put it to words. So he turned the violin concerto into a really silly poem. And the poem was, I play the violin, and I love that very much. And I play the violin and I like it. I like chocolate paste. Lots of it. Right? So it was just, it was a silly story, but that for the first time turned these meaningless notes into a story. And that's, I think, the first concert I actually was able to play as a... And I think it took a bit longer until one of my performances where my dad came to me after the performance, or my parents, I'm not sure, and they said, I think that you played with feeling for the first time. And in Dutch we say, like, met gevoel. with feeling. You played it with feeling. And I think that's not an expression. I think that's just what my family says. But yeah, that made it clear to me that music is about storytelling. It's about so much more than just the notes. And yeah, so that's my relation to that question and why I asked it.
That's beautiful. So let's go back to the idea of the story and the Adhan. Like, can you share with us sort of the story of the Adhan?
So, I mean, that's a story that may be beyond words for a little bit. But to me, that's the story of, I think, forgetting and remembering, or losing and finding, right? So many times during the day, you lose sight of what truly matters, and you lose sight of the truth of existence as it is to me. And the call to prayer for me is the story literally calling from that place of truth to remember again, to come to prayer, to come to that place of success, of overcoming all of that seemed so important.
Yeah.
Right? So to me, it's like a cry. It's a cry. I always love this metaphor of the cry of the reed flute, right? So it's like deeply embedded within the Islamic tradition, this idea of the reed that was cut off and turned into a flute. But then when you hear the reed, you hear the song of the reed flute, you still hear the longing for the place it was once cut from.
Oh, wow.
And I think that is the story of the Adhan to me. That longing for remembrance, longing for that primordial place we all stem from. That's the story of the Adhan.
I love it. So coming back to then your personal journey, and because I know at one point you were thinking of making music your career. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so during my last year of high school, I was convinced. I was convinced I was going to go to the conservatory, study music. And I spent a good half of my week, not at the high school, but instead a 1.5 hour train ride away at this conservatory I was attending. I was doing like this preparatory program. And even though I do not regret doing that preparatory program for one bit, I had an amazing teacher and she taught me so much. I think the most important thing that it taught me was that being a musician is not just about the music. And I think I was faced with the reality of what the profession of a musician is in this modern world. I think just if you look back to the time where if you wanted to have music in a space, you would need a musician there, right? What it means to be a musician in that time is completely different from what it means to be a musician in this time, when there's music everywhere. There's an excess of music. It's not that once you are skilled at playing the violin, you know that you will be able to perform at your local theater or at these cafes or restaurants because they need background music. No, they have background music. So it's a completely different business, and it's very much a business.
Right.
And I knew very well that I'm not a good businesswoman. Whenever me and my brother played games where you needed to make a profit, like these restaurant games, I went bankrupt in no time. It's not something I'm actually good at. Right. And I discovered in music school that that's actually a lot of what being a musician is about, and especially a singer, and especially a female singer. So there's this whole different part to what it actually means to studying yourself, to engaging with an audience, that just really made me dislike music and brought me to this point, especially since I was also doing songwriting. And I remember one time we had to write this song, a specific like James Bond kind of song. And it was fun. We had lots of fun with it. But I also remember just feeling so drained afterwards. Because I was like, I don't want to write James Bond songs. I really don't. Maybe as a joke, but just imagine that actually being
your job.
And I know it can be really fun, but to me, it didn't connect with what music actually means to me. So I remember telling my mom, I wish that there was nothing else that I wanted. I wish that this was it, because I think that's the only way in which you can actually do it in this day and age. If you know that's it, and there's no other thing for me. But for me, there were lots of other things, right? So I was interested in so many things, and I loved to read, and even though I wasn't at high school a lot, I did pretty well. So I knew I could just go to the university as well. So yeah, I tried to combine that for a little bit, and then I decided that actually for me to keep my real connection with what music means to me, I need to cut the whole professional business aspect of it.
Right.
Because I noticed, for example, that when I got certain assignments or when I was writing for certain occasions, during the writing process, I was thinking, like, it was like this person was in my head with me, right? Which is very normal if you're writing for someone.
Right.
But I don't want anyone in my head with me when I'm writing, because it ruins it.
Yeah.
And this is also part of the reason why I struggled to share for a bit, because I'm just afraid as soon as I will write to share, and I know that I'm writing to share, that the anticipation of the reaction will be present in the moment of writing.
Right.
And that's not what I want.
Yeah. So, so when you left the conservatory and you realized that, okay, that obviously is not the path for you, maybe, tell us about kind of where you are now, because you're now on you're on your path to a doctorate in law, which is very interesting. And you're working with, Dr. Abul-Fadl, who is the founder of our institute. But so I want to understand, like, then, to answer your question again, like, what does music mean to you? Where does it fit into kind of where the whole picture of where you are now?
Yeah, I think in my letter of motivation for the law school, I wrote that I'm probably one of the only people whose family is maybe disappointed that they decided to study law and not music. And that in the end, at first I really didn't like law. I have a good friend from primary school, and she always knew she wanted to study law. And I always made fun of her, because that's the most boring thing one could ever decide to do. Like, that's how can you actually, as a kid, want to study law? What's wrong with you, right? But then I found out that actually law is like music. Law is so creative, and it's an art. To me, it is. And I mean, of course, there are many jobs that you can have as a lawyer where you're not an artist. But the whole balance of justice and finding ways to apply the colors that are out there, the rules that are out there to the specific situations, and making it fit well, and finding creative ways to bring justice into the sphere of reality, that's a creative process.
Yeah.
And the other way around, certain aspects of music are highly intellectual, right? So many musicians I know are actually more beta scientists or mathematicians, because there are really mathematical aspects to music. So I think the divide that I so naively drew faded a bit more. That made me actually see myself as a potential lawyer. But really what drew me to law was more of a practical experience of what it can mean practically in this world. So I think I became a bit obsessed with the idea of justice, and that made me pursue both religious studies and law, and in the end pursue both a master's degree specializing in spiritual care, chaplaincy, which for me is justice in the interpersonal sphere, and human rights law, international law, which for me is justice in the societal sphere.
Right. Beautiful.
Yeah. So it's not so far away.
So what
I didn't
happened?
change that much.
Right. So you signed up, you got accepted into UCLA Law, and then what happened with your music?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, I'm really grateful that after that decision not to do music, I didn't write a lot, honestly. I needed a break. So I had a bit of a break, and I joined a choir, and that was wonderful, and we sang together, and I was active in terms of music, but more other people's works. And I think slowly this idea of songwriting as a form of expression started to come back. Because the first song I actually shared was a song I shared when my grandfather passed, when I was in high school. That was actually what made me want to share my first song, because I wrote a song about it and I wanted to share it with him before he passed. And I got to share it with him before he passed. So right from that start, and even before that, I remember the first song I wrote as a kid, it was this environmental protest song, which I wrote because my mom was doing gardening. I was like, the grass doesn't like that, Mom. So it's always been a vehicle of expression for me. And that shifted a bit when we were in the James Bond music writing phase, but then slowly it got back. And I think now my music is like my diary almost. So it's, which also makes it very personal sometimes, because it's my way to process whatever happens. And sometimes I'm not even sure. I mean, it's like a diary where sometimes you write something, and I don't know if you've ever read things back from like years ago, where all of a sudden maybe you realize, oh, I knew that that wasn't the right situation to be in. Or, oh, this is giving me insights I didn't even know I had. Yeah. I have that with my music as well.
Oh, wow.
So for me now, music is very much a vehicle of expression, but more so than that, it is a vehicle of worship. It's a way of worship for me. And I think that's also why I love to start the album with the Adhan, because it's a call to that place of prayer. And I feel like oftentimes I write music from a place of prayer, especially some of the songs on the album.
Yeah. I would love to know a little bit about your process, and I'd also like to know, because you went from playing violin to, you know, I saw you played guitar and you sang, like, you know, your voice and your, you know, the command is amazing. Like, how did you transition, or like, where did the role of your vocal ability like come into that, you know, journey of like playing instruments, and, or, you know, how did you develop that as well?
Yeah. Do you want me to go with the process one, or do you want me to go with the singing one?
Let's start, I guess, with the singing, and then let's get into the process, sure, because then we can also get into the songs.
Sure.
Right.
So, yeah, I started with the violin, and I remember this one time in violin class that, well, already in violin class, I've never been a good music reader. So my engagement with music has always been very much auditive. So that means that when I had a new concert to study or something, or a piece to study, I would go to YouTube, listen to it, and then play it. And then my teacher would be like, hey, but that's a bit different in the sheet music. But I was like, yeah, but it's YouTube. So in that way, since that was my engagement with music, that always also linked to more of a vocal expression, because then if my teacher would ask me, oh, I don't know. I don't know even what it was. I think my teacher maybe asked me to sing the piece or something, like to check whether I knew it. But I just remember that in my violin lesson, I had to sing the piece. Mm-hmm. And then my teacher said something like, Wietske, have you ever thought of like doing singing or singing lessons? And I always really enjoyed singing. I don't remember ever not liking singing. I remember this moment when I was young and we needed to sing in front of the class and everyone was laughing at me, and that made me feel bad and they were laughing because I was so expressive. And I mean, looking back at it, it's funny now, right? Because it's the things that
make you special.
Oftentimes the things that make you stand out,
Mm-hmm.
that people will decide to choose as the ways to drag you down. So I took singing lessons. So once again, privilege, the blessing of my parents. My mom works at our local music school. Mm-hmm. So that access to music education was very easy for me. So I did 1 year of classical singing lessons, actually like opera singing.
Oh, wow.
But I was a kid, so it wasn't wasn't great. And then I moved on to other types of singing lessons, which I did until the year of the conservatory.
So I think like the idea that how, music for you is a form of prayer is so beautiful and so powerful. I'm wondering if you can just share about like the whole idea of prayer, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the role of religion, because you studied it, but then also there's that personal connection and engagement, with God, and then how that all kind of comes together. Like, maybe you can just share some of that if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. So another huge blessing is I got to spend my first Ramadan in Fez, Morocco. And that first Ramadan was in many ways such a formative experience that shaped me in many, many ways beyond what I thought it would. I thought it would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to experience this Ramadan thing. Well, okay, look where we are now. But actually, one of my favorite parts of that first Ramadan was the fact that every Friday we got together, or there was a group that got together, and me and a friend of mine, we joined them, and they would do chanting together, like Arabic religious chants. And I just remember feeling like it gave me an opportunity to lose myself in the moment for a bit.
And were you Muslim at that time?
See, that's a difficult question, Grace.
I know, we talked
so
about
I'm just
this
going to
in our
defer that
other
one.
Conversation. Okay.
Allahu A'lam. I mean, so that's a process. So I remember that being really formative and that becoming such a part of what Ramadan meant to me, and that was a beautiful experience for me. Just like the poetry I read during that month is still, like, poetry reading still feels to me like a part of Ramadan, even though it's maybe not for everyone. It's not like that, but for me, because it was a part of my first Ramadan, and it contributed so much to that experience and to that foundation that was laid during that first Ramadan.
For people who don't know what Ramadan is, could you just give a brief?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So Ramadan is our month of fasting. I would say generally spoken of as a month of fasting where we do not eat and drink from sunrise till sundown, till sunset. But very early during my first Ramadan, someone said to me, which is another foundational experience, forming experience, right? Well, I mean, it really makes no sense to eat and drink, to not eat and drink if it's gonna make you worse in character. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was very strongly tied to this idea of also being on your best behavior, it being a spiritual training in all sense. So not eating, not drinking, but that is more of the symbolic part. Mm-hmm. And the other parts may be the harder work, actually. So almost like a month of purification. And I got to spend my first in Morocco. So yeah, that chanting was so important to me because it was a spiritual experience. And I just remember experiencing a Ramadan in the Netherlands after that, and there being no chanting, there being no poetry, there just being lots of paper and plastic plates and chicken. And it just being so very different. But also so I was confused. I was confused about that. And another thing I was confused about was the fact that when I came back, actually no one in Morocco, my friends in Morocco encouraged me to sing, right? And we were learning songs in Arabic and we were having fun with it. But yeah, I came back to the Netherlands, and then all of a sudden this was a point for discussion, right?
Like you weren't supposed to sing anymore, or it's
yeah,
not okay
like
for
that
a
was
woman
something
to
that
sing.
was at
Yeah.
odds with being a Muslim,
Right.
which created this tension for me because I felt like to be quite honest with you, I never honestly had a feeling that God wanted me not to create music. It was never an issue between me and God.
Right.
But it was very much this idea of, okay, if I am going to be the perfect Muslim, then I can't do that because the community doesn't like it. Or it's not yeah. I'm not even sure how to express it, but I felt like it wasn't something
There are
I
enough
could do.
voices in the Muslim community to make you feel like there's something wrong with music.
And sometimes very
it's-
explicit voices, right?
Yeah.
So I remember this one message that by now has become very symbolic to me. Just this message I got that every song you will put out there, in the Islamic tradition there are these ideas that certain things can outlive you and can create a positive legacy. For example, if you write a beautiful book that will help others after your death, then still everyone who reads that after your death, that will still
Earn
be a
blessings
blessing for you,
right?
right?
Mhm.
Even long after you're gone. If you
Right.
dig a well and people are still get water from that well, or if
Right.
you create a positive legacy that will outlive you, that will still serve you after you're gone.
Right.
And I got sort of the opposite of that argument in the sense that I was told any songs that are out there, either music that you put into the world or music that you helped spread, that will be a continuous legacy of sin for you, right? So every time someone will listen to that, that will be something negative upon you until long after you're gone. All of this will have gathered, and that will be the cause of your descent into hellfire.
Right. Right.
And I remember first reading that message and feeling very bad about it. Just, I felt
Of course.
attacked. I felt unsure because I wasn't very steady in my foundations, right? My roots weren't strong. But honestly, now I look back at it and I think, if on the day of judgment, the thing I'm going to be confronted with, the thing I'm going to be held accountable for is Hasbunallah. Okay, I would sign for that. I have other things to worry about that frighten me.
Yeah.
The people you may have hurt, the things you did wrong, the bad communication, the things that come up in the songs about social justice that I'm a part of just because I'm a part of the system, right? That I condone, the things I don't do that I should do. But the one thing I've never been worried about is Shahada song or Hasbunallah.
Right.
Those can testify against me because I know my intentions, right?
Right. Right.
So I guess all of that tension I felt was mostly due to the fact that I didn't have the time yet to form those roots and to really stand for what I believe. Because to be honest, it never made me shake my belief. The arguments have never been convincing. And it's not that I'm not willing to change my opinion. I change my life in many ways. And I hope to be able to continue to change as soon as a convincing argument reaches me, right? But I've just... no convincing argument has reached me.
Yeah. And for someone who hears your music and feels the impact of it, and when I said it's like, for me, became a religious duty that, to really honestly fight against these ideas that Muslims you're not supposed to do music or anything like that. When you hear something that's just so beautiful and you know that it touches your heart and your soul, and this is something that, is just divine in every way, how could that be not allowed, And so I really felt so strongly about this, and maybe this is a perfect time to play one of these songs. So you mentioned, let you, if you're held accountable on the final day for Hasbunallah, that's the name of one of the songs that you did. What does Hasbunallah mean, first of all?
Hasbunallah means Allah is sufficient for me.
Okay, so maybe we should stop and play that so people know what it is. So Matt, could you play Hasbunallah, H-A-S?
Will we ever cure the aching of hearts that beat for blood alone? How can we prevent the breaking of hearts that turn to solid stone? Oh, we fight and let the heartbreak take us over. We divide and strip our souls down to the bone. As the night of separation takes us over, let a light remind us of what we know. Hasbunallah, 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 wa ni'mal wakeel. You all broken pieces heal, because your peace alone is real. How can we forget our blessing if they're the sight by which we see? Oh, you have even blessed our tests in. You have shared with us the key in the sight of what is ugly and deceiving. See the guide and see the plea to turn around. In the face of disbelief, to keep believing. And in losing, see what truly you have found. Hasbunallah, 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 wa ni'mal wakeel. And you all broken pieces heal, because your peace alone is real. You all broken pieces heal, because your peace alone is real.
So tell us about Hasbunallah. It's an amazing song.
So Hasbunallah was the first song I wrote on this beautiful guitar, which was a gift from you, from Usuli.
Part of the religious duty.
Part of the religious duty.
I was like, I gotta get this one on a guitar. Because you had just traveled from the Netherlands and you couldn't bring your guitar, and so you didn't have a guitar. And I thought, okay, when music is a part of you and your expression and how you process, how can you do that if you don't have a guitar? So
I couldn't have done it. So
thank God.
I'm very grateful for that. Hasbunallah. Hasbunallah was written at night. I think you can hear that. I honestly, I don't feel the need to, I feel like Hasbunallah speaks for itself in many ways, so I don't feel the need to explain anything about the song. Maybe just, I mean, this idea of Hasbunallah, it's just this beautiful phrase. It's a phrase that I think gives so many of us so much comfort, right? So it's a phrase from the Quran that means something to... there's always meaning lost in translation, and I'm definitely not a good translator. But it means something like, God is sufficient for me, or God is sufficient for us, and wa ni'mal wakil, and He is the best of disposers of affairs. And there's a much more rich meaning than that, right? But I think the way in which this phrase comes up is in situations of great hardship, where maybe those situations where you realize that no matter how much the world gives you, it will never be sufficient. Or maybe in those moments where you're stripped of everything, right? So there's this narration that tells that the Prophet Abraham, when he was in the fire, he literally had nothing, right? His body was about to be burned. He said, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. Or when there was about to be this huge attack, or at least there were rumors of this huge attack that would end the Muslim community, right? Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. So I feel like it's an attitude towards life, where a lot of Hasbunallah is, I think about, you know, sometimes you reflect upon what we're actually doing in this world, and it makes you very sad. So it's about the state of our hearts, which is not me saying their hearts, it's very much... And just reflecting on how on earth do we keep forgetting those blessings, right? There's so many. And how do we keep forgetting? But even in that great despair of sometimes thinking, well, God, we're messing up majorly, to think, okay, but even in that, maybe even especially in that, Hasbunallah. You know, when once again that great sense of disappointment comes, whether it's, you know, thinking, oh, I finally found this person that I can really trust, and that will be enough for me. And then actually the blessing is that you found out that that person is never going to be enough for you, because in the end it's only Hasbunallah. So that's what the song is about for me. And it's almost, it's very similar to the Adhan in the way that it feels like a cry, right? So it's like a very fragile cry in the darkness, this remembrance of that truth of Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil.
It's so beautiful. Let's also play the Shahada, because you mentioned that as well.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله 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 وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. I testify by heart and eye, by the tears I cried, I'll no longer deny the blessings in my life that are too numerous to count. My heart I thought was lost, but in your mercy it was found. So from this moment onward, Ya Hadi, be my guide, till even my darkest darkness is just a shadow of your light. Ashhadu an la ilaha
song. So Shahada, we recorded it in this studio, and I think that it was the first song that I actually saw how much work you put into creating the song and all of the harmonies and the layering, and it was just so beautiful. First, can you just tell us about Shahada, and this is probably a good song to even talk about some of the process, but this is and what it means. Let's just start with what Shahada means for people who don't know.
Yeah, so traditionally the Shahada is the testimony of faith that one says to become a Muslim, which is very simple. It simply is professing the fact that there is no God but God, so that God is one, and that the Prophet Muhammad was one of his messengers, right? Was his messenger. And I think I never really had a problem with that statement. I don't remember ever having a problem with that statement, right? And this is why I sometimes feel like it's so silly. Everyone has their own process, and when I say it's silly, I say that very much from my personal perspective, which doesn't mean that I think someone else's experience is silly at all, right? It can make a lot of sense for someone else's process to, for example, have a moment where there's a moment in time, that specific day, I go to the masjid, I go to the mosque, and from that moment, I'm a Muslim. But it feels silly for me in my experience. Because for me, Shahada is a process, and it ties into this idea of remembrance, right? So for me, Shahada is a reminder. And it's maybe the moment I profess it with my tongue, but maybe a minute after, I don't live up to it. Because if I truly believe that God is one and the Prophet Muhammad was his messenger, why don't I act like it? And I don't mean like, why don't I dress like an Arab?
Right.
I mean, why don't I act upon the justice that they taught me? And why don't I have the same level of mercy that he showed, our Prophet? Or, why do I get so invested in something that is other than God? So for me, Shahada is about all of that, about embodying it. But that doesn't mean that I don't think the phrase is beautiful. I wrote a song about it because I think it's so beautiful, right? But it's a reminder for me more than one set moment in time, and after you're done, you're in and you're good and your sins are forgiven and welcome to the club. Right? That feels... Which is what a lot of people hear
Which
and
is
feel. Fine, which
Yeah.
is fine, but doesn't sit right with me.
Right.
So, as a part of that process, I said my Shahada after I had said many Shahadas in prayer, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for me, that one moment of actually saying my Shahada, saying the testimony of faith, was more of a decision that this was the way I was choosing for the rest of my life. God willing, right? So it was this clear decision, okay, you know what, this is the way. For me, this is the way, and I want to keep going on that way, and I know it's going to be rough sometimes, but this is my commitment. So my Shahada was more about commitment. And when I said my Shahada, it was a regular evening. The sun just set. I had a beautiful experience, and I felt I was ready to say that. And when I was actually saying my Shahada, I also felt like this melody joined in in the moment. And so it's a very special melody to me, because it's busy in my head and there's lots of music. But this one was a special one, right? And I mean, it took much longer. It took a long time, I think years, before I wrote it into a song. So I added the verses that are, for me, very much about what the heart of Shahada is to me. And this song is dhikr. So this idea of remembrance, it's very much, for me, the heart of the Islamic tradition.
What is dhikr for people who don't know?
Yeah,
what
so
it is?
dhikr literally means remembrance, the act of remembrance, remembering. So oftentimes this act is performed through literally saying the name of God. The idea, if it's on your lips, if it's on your tongue, it's on your mind, it's in your heart, right? That's a very literal definition of what dhikr is. That's beautiful. I think in many ways you can show that you're actively remembering this essence or this truth. So actually I use literal dhikr a lot in my songs, in the harmonies. So this is one of those, I mean, silly little things, right? But for me, a lot of my meaning goes into harmonies. So we can talk about that, for example, when it comes to the song about the 99 names of God, because that's all about the harmonies. But even in Shahada, just the conscious choice to have all the harmonies on either Allah or Hu or Huwa gives this sense of, when the harmonies come in, it's like this sense of divine presence.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes that's what the harmonies connote to me, right? As soon as the harmonies come in, it's this feeling you sometimes get when we're lucky to sometimes get, right? Where you feel a part of the bigger whole.
What does Hu and Hua mean?
So it's references to God. So, for example, when we say God is the greatest, we say Allahu Akbar, or Huwa, which refers to just He, so it's He. Sometimes shortened to Hu, sometimes with the idea of not wanting to specifically express the masculine. The masculine is just the grammatical way to refer to God, because God in the Islamic tradition is beyond gender, beyond any type of duality we could link to God. But of course our language is very much compartmentalized, so we need to figure out a way to talk about it, right? So these are all words that refer to God and that are used in dhikr, like meditative practices where the names of God are repeated.
Okay, so Shahada is one of these songs that's been so powerful for all of us who have heard it. And I know Dr. Abul Fadl shared with me that when he heard the Shahada song, he just always gets the feeling that all of creation is bearing down and witnessing. And I know he was asking one question was if that's how you feel, or how you felt when you wrote that song.
I mean, like, it is.
Yeah.
Right? So that thanks for mentioning that, because no, but we make Shahada so small, right? Yeah. The mountains are making Shahada all the time. Like, the trees are in a constant state of frustration, and we still make Islam so small. So yes, that's what it's about. Yes. No, absolutely. Just this idea that when you're saying Shahada, you're not the exception. You're not the exceptional convert who's saying Shahada and struggling with the Arabic and feeling unnatural about it. Mm-hmm. You're actually, at that moment, finally returning to the harmony of nature. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. Of creation. Yeah.
Absolutely. So tell us about the 99 names of God.
Yeah, so this is a choral piece, a song I wrote after engaging in this wonderful, wonderful journey that was a 99-day reflection on the 99 names of God. So there are many more than 99 names that are used, that we as people use to refer to the divine, right? In the Islamic tradition, there are many more than 99, but 99 is a beautiful symbolic number, indicating that there's much more beyond it, right? But it's also it's a beautiful list of different names that are used either in the Quran or in the Islamic tradition to refer to God, which just shows you all of these different aspects of what our relationship as human beings with God can be like. So at the end of this 99-day experience where I had to write a little reflection every day, and I recommend this to anyone if you're looking for just a little retreat you can do with yourself, low cost, you only need a notebook. It's wonderful. So after these daily reflections, I felt like I felt really intimate with some of the names. And I mean, all of the names are beautiful, but of course, depending on which state of your life you're in, what you're going through, you'll have more of a relationship with either or the other. And that's the beauty of it, right?
So do you want to give some examples of some of the names?
Yes, of course. So, I mean, the first names that are mentioned are emphasizing God's mercy. So the relationship of mercy and compassion, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, which are names we use a lot, names you used at the beginning of this video, right? So, names that indicate that God is the most merciful of creatures in his relationship with us, and the most compassionate, and that we connect with God when we act in mercy and compassion. There is this idea of God as the light, An-Nur, God as the most patient, right? So when we act in a way that we radiate light, that we bring light to situations of darkness, or when we act patiently, that's our way of connecting with God. That's the way, right? Or when we act generously, that's the name of God. Or when we act kindly, that's the name of God. Or when we act justly, right? And that can mean being firm sometimes. So there's all of these ways in which we as human beings can connect with God and act in a way of worship. And for me, many of those, this piece it was a crazy piece to write. And I honestly don't know how I wrote it. I honestly don't. And I just, there are a lot, I don't usually really talk about these because they're very personal reflections, and I hide them in music because most people don't get it. But for example, one of the names is Al-Fatah, the opener of the bringer of relief, openings, right? And that is actually the first harmony in the piece that is clearly dissonant. So it doesn't sit quite right. It feels uncomfortable. And that's a very conscious choice, right? Because oftentimes it's those situations of discomfort, pain, that brings the openings, right? With hardship comes ease.
Right.
Or the last one, As-Sabur, the patient, the most patient. That's the longest name of the piece. I mean, I think it's genius. Whoever compiled the 99 names, I don't know, to end with As-Sabur. Genius, right? Because by the time you get to 99, it's like, oh, yeah, you're right. Or if you try to memorize them, by the time you get to that one, whew, you've been patient. So it's also the last name of the piece, and it's the longest one. And the entire piece hinges towards minor. It's mostly minor, but it ends in major. And it actually only ends on the last note of As-Sabur. So there's the whole line, and I mean, of course, that's a reflection. That's a musical reflection, right?
That's beautiful.
So there are many reflections in the piece, and I'm not going to share them all, but they're there. And it's just nice to listen to it and see what kind of a relationship you get with it.
Right. So let me also ask you about the name Wadud, because that features in a couple of the songs on the album, at least that I am aware of. So maybe we could start here, and then we'll pick it up again when we get to the next song on that.
Yeah, so Al-Wadud for me is the name that refers to this idea of divine love. So God as the beloved, God as this source of love, and the relationship that we can have with Al-Wadud for me is love. Which, I mean, love is a big word, right? It can mean many different things. That's an impossible question for me to answer. But I just finished reading this beautiful book by Bell Hooks, which is called, I think, All About Love. No.
Yes.
Yes?
It's called
Okay.
All About, yeah.
Amazing.
I saw you reading it.
Okay. And she referred to someone else's definition, whom I forgot, but I thought it was beautiful. She actually referred to love as the idea of creating space or doing what you can to help the other person come closer to the divine, or grow spiritually, leaving it a bit more open, but to help the other person grow, right? And I feel like in many ways this whole world is God's helping us grow.
Yes.
Right? So this whole idea of this world as this womb and we're just growing, I really like that. That
beautiful.
image.
Yeah.
So Al-Wadud for me is a beautiful, beautiful name, because to me it opens up the doors of God when people say God is love, I can accept that as truth because of Al-Wadud, right? Just like when people say God is justice, I can accept that as truth because of Al-Adl, right? Because we have all of these names, and I think, then there is of course a tendency, but we only limit it to the Arabic, and that's silly. But it actually opens up the doors to talk about God as so much bigger than. And I love the name Allah, right? I love the name Allah, but I don't love what we're doing with the name Allah, because we make it seem like it's something other than God. And when I say we, I don't even know who I mean.
Yeah.
So don't ask me on that. But I feel like, and I also mean me, because I sometimes do it as well.
Well, but you touched on that because I think it's a really important distinction, because I know we've all had experiences. You very recently had an experience where in a church where someone said, we don't say Allah, we don't do Allah. And it makes you feel like, well, do you have a problem with the Arabic language? Because it just means God, right? But people who don't, they want people to think that, Muslims believe in a God called Allah as if it's different than the one and only God. So I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about that, but just it's an important, clarification for people who don't know.
It's true. Yeah, I think it's something I encounter a lot. For me, it's very simple. Nah. I mean, in the Quran it says, like, tell them, our God and your God are one. Done. No need for further discussion, right? There are things that are actually interesting to discuss. This is not. Because it undermines my entire faith if Allah would be some sort of different God, right? Because we're saying, say there is no God but God. Right? So then how could there be... There's just God, right? That's like the fundament.
Right.
So, no, I actually... that's one of the conversations that pops up a lot, and it's one of those simple conversations that I deeply struggle with because of this, because it's a fundamental, essential for me that God is one and God must be greater than all of these religions. And that ties into many of the songs, so I'm sure we'll get back to that.
Okay. So I want to move, you said in passing hardship with ease. And this is one of these Quranic verses that is very important for our tradition. Maybe you can talk about that because you have a song called Hardship. And then we can also play that song so people know.
Yeah, so to me this is such a beautiful phrase. So it's a Quranic phrase, it's from the Quran, from this beautiful chapter. And I think there are I've heard so many wonderful reflections on the phrase, because it can mean so many things to so many different ears. And I really like this idea of the fact that it's with hardship comes ease and not after hardship comes ease, right? After rain comes sunshine. No, there's a blessing in the rain, right? It always makes me think of this beautiful metaphor of the cracks being where the light enters in, right?
Right.
So the lyrics of the song, it refers to this idea of with hardship comes ease. It also refers to this idea of the well within the story of the Prophet Joseph. And the whole song is kind of, it sounds like it's, thanks to our amazing sound engineer, it sounds like it's sung from a well, right? You hear the echo of the well. And I honestly feel like that's a song that's like written from down in the well.
Yeah.
But then the lyrics are down in the well is where the water springs.
Yeah.
Right? So that's where the blessing of the water comes from. And down in my pain is where the change begins.
It's so
So
beautiful. So deep.
down in that moment of hurt, there's the lesson. And I remember hearing about people who can't feel pain, which sounds ideal, right? But then they get into all sorts of injuries because they don't feel that their harm is being done to them, right? So pain in so many ways redirects us and helps us to make the changes that are necessary because we now see what is harming us.
Yeah.
So with hardship comes ease.
Beautiful.
I sit in silence, too tired to yell. At the bottom of my dear old well, water rise up, drown my fears, heal the hurting, hold my tears in the heart of misery. The broken-hearted sees truly with hardship comes ease. Oh, light that belongs to the east nor west, in the darkest night, the lost you have blessed. For down in the wells where the water springs, and down in my pains where the change begins, in the heart of misery, the broken-hearted sees truly with hardship comes ease. Oh, light that belongs to the east nor west, in the darkest night, the lost you have blessed. For down in the wells where the water springs, and down in my pains where the change begins.
Okay, so after the hardship song, I want to talk about the cup of tea song, which is great and has a lot of meaning for us. But anyway, it's a nice shift. So maybe you can tell us about that.
Yeah, so I very intentionally put that song in terms of order after the hardship song, right? Because sometimes you just need a cup of tea. So I feel like after that song, you need a cup of tea. And I really like this song. This song, I really love it. And I love it partly because it's so simple.
Yeah.
And I feel like this may be the song that has the most layers. Not in terms of it's very simple and straightforward, right? But it also has so many layers to me personally. So, I mean, on the most superficial layer, and I don't mean superficial to say like it's not true or in a degrading way, because it's what's at the surface. You see it clearly, right? It doesn't make it less true. But at this most superficial layer, it's about tea. And it really is. Right? So, I was only recently introduced to Yorkshire tea by our friend Joe. And that tea is amazing.
Amazing. We're all
So
converts.
it's literally, the song is about tea, right? But it would also be absolutely silly to say that it's only about tea, even though the song is called Cup of Tea, right? So it's about so much more. It's about, it's like a societal critique in a way about how fast we're running and all of these things we deem to be important, and we just need to take a break sometimes, right? So that's almost like a capitalist critique. Then there's a layer where it's a love song. And then I think for me the deepest layer, which doesn't mean it's the most real layer, but it's just the deepest layer, it's also about dhikr. It's about remembrance, right? So at the deepest layer, this song for me is like the Adhan. Busy, 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 the world is happening, you're in a hamster wheel. And then there's this call. And then in that layer, that's God's call for me. If we read it from this layer, right? So it's God saying, come and sit with me. Have a cup of tea. And then maybe a cup of tea in that sense more of an experience, right? Yeah. This idea of tasting is very much an Islamic spiritual thing, right? So this idea of really experiencing, what we talked about before, this idea of being a part of the whole, the sense of closeness, the sense of peace, also one of the names of God. In this moment, see, there's nothing else that needs to be, right? So in this moment, this idea of being a child of the moment, also very much embedded in the Islamic tradition, just caring about not the future, not the past, just right here and now. Nothing else that needs to be. God is one, right? One of my favorite ayahs saying, كُلُّ مَنْ عَلَيْهَا فَانٍ وَيَبْقَ وَجْهُ رَبِّكَ ذُو الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. It means everything on earth will vanish, right? Everything we know, it will be gone. But the face of God, that will remain. So I think sometimes we get a taste of that in the moments where we realize that will happen, and that is the truth of things, right? Until you're wholly here with me. And that's a joke, right? Because it's this wordplay of holy, like completely, and then holy, which it fits very well within this idea of the insan al-kamil, like the complete person, which is something to aim for. And then this idea of like a holy person, so like a wali, like a friend of God, and those being the same things. And then in the English, it also being a very similar, in English it also being a similar word, right? So that's funny to me. And then just, oh love, let's have a cup of tea. So also this idea of God as a beloved, right? Yeah. And I'm not saying that it's not that either it's about tea or it's about God or it's about love or it's about capitalism, right? It's all of them. And I feel like that is much of what the Quran is to me. And so often we only talk about the Quran in that tea level, right? Yeah, exactly. And it's not that the tea level isn't true. It's just that it's injustice to the text to only talk about the tea and not talk about the rest. Right. So yeah, I love that song, and it is a very simple song, and that's its power.
Wow, amazing, truly amazing. So a lot of your songs, I would call sort of the social justice, like genre. And the first one that we did, which I absolutely love, is City of Angels, which is, maybe you can just tell us about how City of Angels came about.
Yeah, sure. Maybe first to say why the social justice songs to me are such an important part of the album, and I think it came up a bit, right? So this idea of faith really not having meaning when it's not paired with action. So often in the Quran, like, the people are spoken to as those who have faith and act righteously, right? Like, they're two parts of the same coin, two sides of the same coin. So I felt like we need to reflect that in the album as well. So not only have all of these philosophical songs about God being one, but also having like the practical hands-on of what that then means, right? Or so City of Angels, it's like my joke to say that it's my love song for LA.
Los Angeles.
Yeah, Los Angeles. Oh, I'm so LA, I just
Yeah,
said it.
everyone knows LA.
So yeah, I moved to LA for my studies, and yeah, I think it's my least favorite place I ever lived. And I mean, this song is very much dedicated to a specific person. It's dedicated to Stevie, who was one of the first people I met in LA. When I lived for a little while subletting this apartment in Santa Monica. And Stevie was my neighbor. He also lived on Santa Monica Boulevard. Only difference was he lived on the corner of the street. And from my bedroom and from the kitchen space I shared, I could see Stevie. I would look right into his space, his temporal home. And I had been worried about going to a city where there is such a big problem with an unhoused population, or such a lack of resources, and quite honestly a lack of care in all of the senses of that word. And I'd been worried about it because I knew that once I was going to be a part of the situation, I was going to be responsible for it as well, right? So this is like, when we talk about the songs, I'm not worried about those, but I'm worried about this, right? Because as soon as you become... Who am I kidding? Right now I'm a part of that system, right? We're all a part of that system. So that's a huge responsibility. So I remember calling with a friend and just saying, how do I act Islamically in this city? How am I a just person in this city? Because I mean, just if you take one of the sayings of the Prophet seriously, right? The saying, he is not a believer who has his stomach filled while his neighbor is hungry. There are no believers in LA. There's always a hungry neighbor. No believers, right? If we just for once take a social justice hadith literal, which is, I know, but you have a huge problem, right? That's a corrupted city. So I remember I had a good phone call with a friend, and my friend was like, well, I mean, if that's a problem to you, then just share your meal. Right? The solution seems to be easy, as straightforward as the hadith. So that was a great example of me being stupid and being in my head about things and just forgetting that Stevie was actually a guy who was my neighbor and who I could have a chat with, right? So we met, and I think honestly Stevie is one of the people in LA I connected with the most. So after a while we became regular tea friends. So we would have tea together. We have dinners together a couple of times, and the song is very much written by Stevie because it's based on his experiences, on what he shared with me. And the song is very much not... I don't feel good when I hear the song because it's very much a critique of myself, right? So when there is the contrasting line and the second pre-chorus where it's, on your mattress with silk sheets, you dim the lights of the street and you pray you may stay in the way of the elite, that is about me, right? And that's not the part you want to be about. You want to have about yourself. But it's true, because wealth is always relative, and in that situation I was the wealthy one. And I have a responsibility. And I'm not sure I lived up to it. I don't think I did. Because in the end, what practical difference did I make? Nothing. So I only had a month in Santa Monica, and just the week before I left, Stevie got notice that he needed to leave the place because, of course, I mean, there are some legal measures in place that make it that that help people not to get arrested when they're on the street, when they have nowhere else to go, because technically you're not allowed to, you know, be such a barrier on public property. But after a while you get notice that it's time for you to move to a different spot, and that they need to clean it for sanitary reasons. So he got notice. He knew he would have to leave soon, and it actually took longer than we expected, so we said our goodbyes every time. And in the end, on the same day I moved, I'm still not even sure what the correct word is for it, right? It's like a raid. They call it cleaning. So I left on my bus to go to the new apartment, and as I left they pulled up and they they took Stevie and they took his belongings, and probably to move him to downtown. And I mean, I think the most beautiful conversations we had was about our dreams. And Stevie's dream was to become an astronaut. And Stevie always thought my dreams were silly because they weren't big enough. And I think he was right, you know, because why waste your dreams on silly things? But
Do you know
one of our dreams was it's a deal. We made a deal to meet again in 25 years and to you know, catch up, see how we're doing. And that was an act of resistance for him to say that, because people don't survive long on the street. Especially once you're there for a while, it gets harder and harder to leave the street, right? But you know, actually saying this explicitly, I hope this is going to be the tool for us to meet again in 25 years, because there was no way to stay in touch, right?
Do you know how old he was?
I think he said he was beginning 50. Yeah. So Stevie, you hear this?
You've got a date in 25 years.
You got a song.
And a song.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. It's an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, you know, I know that like this music is so personal and so painful sometimes, maybe all the time, you know, and that's part of the power of, I think we're receiving it, you know, we're hearing it. And like City of Angels was something that was actually, because, you know, we lived in LA for many years, and so it's the same thing, we're part of that population, and it's a really hard reality to face. So we have just a few more songs to finish talking about, and all of them have such a, you know, a personal, like a very unique style and element to them. But maybe let's start with Tide, because Tide is really unique in its own way. Maybe you could tell us about that.
Yeah, so Tide is the only rap song on the album, and I personally just love the idea of having an Adhan and a rap song on the same album.
Exactly.
I just like that. Just, you know, because I feel like a lot of what I fell in love with the Islamic tradition was diversity, and this idea of true diversity. So I like the fact that that's reflected in the album, right? And I mean, so Tide is inspired by the hip hop tradition, which is very much a tradition in which injustices are called out, right? I mean, it's also a big tradition, so that's not all the tradition is about. And it's a living thing, it's evolving, right? But that's a part of the musical genre that strikes me, that I love about it. So, yeah, Tide was written, I wrote Tide during the early days of the protests in Iran, and I think that's the context that inspired the specific topic for me. So I would say Tide is very much about rising up against injustice, and specifically also gender-based injustice or misogyny, violence against women, oppression of women. And it's built up from two parts. So there's a part specifically addressing the brothers, and then there's a part specifically addressing the sisters. Because I mean, it's like we talked about being a part of the system in LA. Everyone that's a part of the system is a part of keeping it going, right? So it's silly to just point at one group of the population. So yeah, I think Tide speaks for itself. A lot of the lyrics speak for themselves. One of the musical aspects that is in it is the fact that every time the chorus comes back, a voice is added, which really, for me, symbolizes this idea of a movement starting with one brave voice, and then slowly voices joining the movement until you create true social change, right? And I believe in true change. I mean, I feel like oftentimes we don't recognize the changes that have happened, and if we do that just a little bit more, the changes that have happened both for the better and the worse, right? Because change is not in and of itself positive. We see that change is very much possible, and that things are constantly changing, and that we just need brave voices to be willing to be that lone voice for people to join. Yeah, so that's what Tide's about.
It's a great song. And you actually then reminded me about the Adhan, the second Adhan that you're going to include on the album, and you can talk about that and the idea of diversity and justice and all that goes in with that piece.
Yeah, so I love listening to Quran recitation, and I think Quran recitation for me, it's music. And I know that may be a controversial thing to say sometimes, because a lot of the discussion about music, when there is discussion about music, clearly the line is drawn with Quran recitation, because that's a sphere in and of itself. Well, I mean, it's melody, it's rhythm, it's a very set rhythm, right? The language determines the rhythm. But it's music. And I remember, I expressed this once, and then I was afraid to express it again because of the reaction, but who cares? When I recite the Quran, I feel like I'm reading music. It's a very similar experience to me as when I'm reading a musical piece, because the instructions are there, right? So the rhythm is in the text. Yeah. But there's also space for improvisation, and that's where the melody line comes in, right? To follow your heart. So for me, Quranic recitation is very much a musical experience. And right now, I think in many of the recitation styles we hear, it's very much an Arab musical experience, right? So a lot of the classical modes of Quran recitation stem from Arabic musical. Arab is too shallow, because there's great Persian, Turkish traditions, but more general, and I don't like the term Middle Eastern, but difficult, right? Either way, there are clearly some traditions that are underrepresented, some musical traditions that are underrepresented within this field of Quran recitation and the modes and musical themes that are used. And actually, one of the first Quran recitations that felt soothing to me, because what feels soothing to you in terms of music is very much about the music you grew up with, and the skills that feel home to you, was African styles of reciting, and specifically like West African styles of recitation. So there is this particular way of reciting in which the pentatonic scale is used, which is a whole tone scale. So there are equal differences between all of the notes. Normally, a scale or music finds its color through the different distances, and then, even in the Arabic modes, there are even smaller distances than half distances, so it gets very colorful. But this pentatonic scale, there is only whole note differences, so the difference between every note is equal, and it gives it a very unique feeling. It feels like a major scale because it has those whole tone differences, but it's also not a major scale because major scales do have the half tone differences as well. So what I like about this scale is the fact that to me it represents this idea of radical equality. So the difference between every note is the same, and every note is in harmony or is potentially in harmony with the other. And I just love the idea of that when reciting the Quran. And then to tie that in with the fact that right now it's kind of like a style of recitation that's frowned upon, like, oh, that's not proper cultured
Right.
Arab recitation.
Right.
I like that. You know, the fact that because that makes the idea of the equality aspect of it even stronger. So that's why I like to recite in this. But just being honest, I like this idea, but I also just like how it makes me feel. So it personally gives me peace because of the place I grew up in and the fact that it's more close to a major scale within the Western tradition. So I love to listen to African reciters, specifically West African reciters. So that's the story of the second Adhan.
That's fabulous. And in balance with the first one is that they're so different, but they're both so beautiful. Absolutely. Okay, thank you. So now we have, I'm going to let you choose because one is sort of interesting, the message, which is, I don't want to say much because...
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Okay, so tell us about the message, because we have a subtitle for that name too, or that song too, right?
Yeah. This song I wrote here in Ohio. And it's the country song of the album. And I never thought I would write a country song, not because I have anything against country, it's just not my usual mode of expression. I don't listen to country music a lot. I don't play it a lot. It's not really a thing where I'm from. So everything about...
Where did it come from?
I honestly don't know, Grace. It's a puzzle to me. I mean, it's from influence, right? So I heard it in I don't know, public spaces. And the moment it happened, it was just I sat down and I was like, okay, I want to just play the guitar for a little bit. This is often how things start. And then I found myself playing these chords, the opening of the song. And then I just started playing with it because I thought it was funny. I was like, oh my god, this sounds so Ohio. So I started playing with it. But I didn't write it out into a song because I was like, okay, that's not, that's just fun. And then a little while later, I still remembered. And usually for me, when I still remember something from a little jam session or whatever you want to call it, to me it's an indication, okay, I need to work with that. Because, I mean, even if you take away any idea of guidance or whatever, then still it's this idea of, okay, so it's catchy enough that it sticks with me, right? So it's something that works. But of course for me there's a layer of guidance as well. Then I played around with it. And the idea that came to me was to write a song that's so Islamic, but also so very country. So I think the first time I told you I wrote this song, I said I wrote a song and I would describe it as Bob Dylan meets Hadith.
Right.
So Hadith are the narrations of the Prophet Muhammad, and so that's literally what the song is. So the verses are more inspired by the music and the writing style of Bob Dylan, specifically the song Blowing in the Wind. So there's this line in that song that goes, how many times must the cannonballs fly before they are forever banned? That's like the model phrase of the verses. So it's all of these questions. The first one being, how many times must the truth reach our eyes before fools become wise and turn to action? So, because I don't want to say that I think that Bob Dylan songs are not Islamic. I think Bob Dylan songs are actually very Islamic most of the times, right? But it depends on how small we make Islam, right? Because to me it relates to this idea of, you know, in the Quran we're told that there was never a prophet that was sent or a messenger that was sent that did not speak in the language of the people he was sent to. And then the reason that's given for that is so the message would be clear.
Right.
Right, so that's what the sentence "hear the message clearly spoken" refers to in the song.
Oh, beautiful.
And that relates also just to this idea that, you know, wisdom, wherever we find it, we're taught it's the lost property of the believer, which relates to the fact that we're told that there have been countless prophets, right? I think the numbers go crazy, like 124,000 prophets we don't know about that have been sent to their people in their language, within their cultural settings, and that everywhere around us we can find the traces of what they once taught. So maybe Bob Dylan's songs are the traces,
Right.
the hikmah, the wisdom of some prophet we didn't know about that's still in the culture. So I guess this song plays with the idea of what would a truly Ohioan American message, what would the message sound like in Ohio?
Right.
And I mean, it's pretty much, the song is all plagiarism. So the chorus it's just a hadith. It's just the saying of the prophet, which is a beautiful saying about social justice, about justice in general, about responsibility, right? So it's a very famous saying that whoever encounters an evil or an injustice, they have a responsibility to change it with their hands. And if they cannot do that, then they should change it with their tongue. And if they cannot do that, then they should fight it in their heart. But that is the least. Like, that is the lowest level of faith.
Right.
And that's such a strong message. I feel like that would resonate with so many people. But oftentimes it just doesn't reach people because it's packed in a very culturally specific package, which is completely opposite from what I feel like we're taught by this idea that every prophet came speaking the language of their people. Right? So why are we speaking in a language that people don't understand?
It's so beautiful. And you had mentioned to me before we did this conversation that you don't often talk about your songs.
Yeah.
And, you know, and so I'm really grateful that you're sharing, because I just feel there's so much wisdom in what you're saying. And it's really also important that you mentioned that a lot of people who are not Muslim might hear the lyrics and think, oh, that's actually really nice, but not really know that that is something that is Quranic or Islamic.
Right.
And so it's an important point of education for people, you know, because there's so many conceptions that Islam is, or the Quran is something that's not.
It's the book of violence, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so I think people would be surprised to know that so much beauty comes from these very, you know, intuitive verses. So that's so.
I mean, I know I was surprised, right? So, of course, other people who grew up in those same Islamophobic environments are also surprised. It's like, it's not a strange thing to be surprised, but it starts to become concerning when you start seeing the beauty, but you're still not willing to engage because of those ideas in your head, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it's like for me, like as a convert, I hear the same essence of the message from somewhere else, and it's like, oh, this is a Christian idea, this is a Jewish idea, or this is just a, you know, spiritual idea, as if it has no, you know, like anchor. And people get so excited, it's so brilliant, but it's like, you know what, that's Quranic, it's Islamic, you know, it's part of our tradition.
See, but that doesn't bother me as much, because for me, like, Islam is not just, oh, there's Christianity and Judaism and there's Islam. Right. For me, it's like, yeah, you know, Islam is like this idea of anyone who submits, right? So that Christian man who expressed that wisdom may be a much better Muslim than I will ever be.
Right? Of course, yeah.
But just because it has a different meaning to me, I think something can be 100% an indigenous wisdom and still be Islamic without me branding it as a hadith. Right. Right, but exactly. Just at its root.
Right.
because it comes from that oneness.
Right. But I love that what your music brings is to say, hey, this actually, Islam it can come from Islam, right? And not that it's not ever going to come from Islam, because that religion is so backwards, it's
Right.
so inhumane. Look at what people do, and so this is the power, and then it comes delivered through this beautiful vehicle. So, and then let's talk about the unsung song. It's a little bit of a tongue twister, which I think also relates to what we're talking about. It's so beautiful. So tell us about the unsung song.
Yeah, Unsung Song. I think this song, it has many layers, and I feel like I can relate to this song differently in different stages or with different emotions. But I feel like the core message of the song is, it's a way for me, it relates to this idea of art and the creative process in a way as something that's very much tied to all of creation, and that's very much a natural process to be in, right? So I love the word inspiration. I know there's people who hate it because it gives this idea of, you're not doing anything and it just comes, but I kind of feel like sometimes it's like that. But I like the word inspiration because when you really look at the word, at what it literally means, where it comes from, it has this meaning of to inhale. So spiritus, like the Latin, refers to the breath. So inspiration is the act of inhaling. And that, in the Latin you see this connection of spiritus to the spirit, right? So, which is also very much in the Islamic tradition, this idea of the ruh, right? This thing we don't really know what it is, but it's related to something that was breathed into us. And it always makes me think, I would never claim my breath. I would never say this breath, this inhalation, and this exhalation, they're mine. And it feels as silly to say that about my art, right? Because it's something that goes through you. It's an experience. So I guess that also ties into this whole idea of the creative process as something spiritual, something that's tied to this idea of trust, tawakkul, that whoever is the one that, feeds the birds every day and gives me the words, to this sentence, even though I have no idea where I'm going. It's trusting that you will reach that end, and trusting that you will end up with that song that you need to write, or that piece of art you need to make.
The divine with your...
I guess I'm not sure whether it's for me, the creative process is about a connection. And then, just to throw in another one of the names, right? A connection to al-musawwir, like the shaper. So being a part temporarily of this process of shaping and working with what's out there, and not creating because it's all already there, but shaping. And the same way that a pregnant woman can be a part of that process of, it's not just about, or when you're cooking your food, it's not just about the creative process, or maybe the creative process is bigger than we want to think about it, but that makes it an act of worship to me. Yeah. But this song, I forgot. Yeah, so that's one of the layers it touches upon for me. So this idea of just singing with the birds, right? The birds, they got their song from somewhere. They don't know. They wouldn't claim it as theirs. So interacting with that, or integrating with that. And it's also about this, it also expresses a deep grief about the state of singing in our modern society, and the way in which singing has become this thing that only talented people can do, and that is very much about the ego. and that has been channeled into these competitions, right? And singers have become these huge idols. Like, we don't even hide it. We call the show Idols. Like, we don't even care anymore, right? That's so sad because singing is such a powerful tool for processing, I feel like it's a part of the Islamic tradition, right? In Quran recitation, in calling the Adhan, we're actively told to use our voice. And not to use our voice to get money or to get fame or to get praise, but to use our voice to connect with that innate state of being. And I feel like a lot of people are afraid to use their voice in that way because they're taught that they are not one of those exceptional talents, so their voice is not worthy to be heard.
Right.
I never read that in the Quran. Recite, except for those of you who have known it. No, it doesn't say that, right?
Yeah,
that's stupid.
so
It's stupid.
Yeah.
Like, the best choirs are those with the diversity of voices, right? Where all of those different voices come together, and it pisses me off. The anger is coming up. I hate it. Because I once tried to do this dhikr circle in the Netherlands, and I'm so glad that a lot of people showed up, but a lot of people also didn't show up. Why? I can't sing. It's like, you can sing, and it's not about sounding pretty. It's not. It's not about you. All right. So that's another layer to the song, and then a last layer would be this idea that sometimes we need to express things, right? And it doesn't even have to be through singing, but I feel like this idea of an unsung song that you carry with you because you're ashamed, or you feel like, I feel like sometimes it's this feeling that you feel like it will become real again, or it will hurt you again when you express it. And just actually feeling the relief of expressing those things we don't want to talk about. And we've had conversations about this. I'm not for sharing everything with everyone. Absolutely not. But I think keeping everything to yourself is equally destructive.
Yeah. Thank you. That was very deep and beautiful. So we only have one song left to discuss, which is Roots. Which is one of my absolute favorites, which is really hard to... all of them are my favorites. I could easily say that about all of the songs. But Roots is very, very special. So there's so many different reasons. Can you tell us about Roots?
So Roots is a song I didn't plan to record at all. I was thinking, how can I thank all of you for, once again, all of the gratitude, or all of the generosity. I couldn't find the word. All of the generosity, all of the support, all of the love. And I just thought, okay, I'm gonna write them a song. So this song is, to me, a song about Usuli, a song about all of you, a song about the core of what I believe is the strength of Usuli, of what it stands for. And of course I wrote it, so it's from my perspective, right? So but to me, so there's this idea of Usuli as the foundations, or the foundational principles, or the roots, right? Like the essence. So that's how it ties to this song about roots. And I think it's very much about dealing with all of the hate that gets thrown your way and responding to it with love, from a place that is rooted in love. I think I keep saying one of my favorite verses in the Quran, but that's...
It's like me saying,
it's like being a part of the Holocaust, right? Every time after we do a Quran study circle, I'm like, oh, that's my favorite. But one of my favorite verses in the Quran, it's the verse where it's stated that if you respond to whatever bad is thrown your way with that which is better, that your enemy will become your friend, or will become a dear friend. And I think for a long time I struggled with that. A lot of my favorite verses I actually struggled with. Because I was like, that's not true. Because sometimes you can be really, really nice to someone for a really long time, and it's like an active struggle. And then they still don't become your friend. They're still awful to you, right? I was like, it's not true. And then the response I got was, oh yeah, just wait. But I'm not stupid. I know it's not, I mean, of course, who knows, right? Things may always happen. But I don't know. To me, it was like, that cannot be the only, that needs to be the T layer of the meaning, right? There must be something else. And to me, the verse only really spoke to me when I read it in the sense of the fact that your enemies can give you things that your friends will never be able to give you, right? So your enemies can give you the gift of the opportunity to show patience, the opportunity to exercise justice, or the opportunity to bring that light into a situation of darkness. And I mean, it's great to have friends, to just have this sense of peace together. But in the bigger scheme of things, the other gift is greater. When you can actually act upon it and return that which is evil with something that's better.
Yeah.
So then in the bigger picture, your enemies are actually closer than your friends, right? Or they're almost more valuable because they give you something that your friends, in all of their, I mean, maybe I'm idealizing. I have some friends that definitely give me the opportunity to exercise patience, right? But I mean, if we just have that strict dichotomy, then yes, your enemies can be closer than your friends, for they give you a gift that your friends never could.
Yeah.
So there's this idea of being rooted in that responsive love and giving, not because you're naive, not because you're a people pleaser, but because you're rooted in that sense of love, connecting to this idea of divine love, right? Which is not a naive kind of being in love, sending flowers. Nothing wrong with that, beautiful. But that's not that's not all of the layers that divine love is about, right? It's also about standing for justice, but also bringing light and continuing to give light even when you're surrounded by darkness. So maybe one last thing to mention is that in this chorus of the song, there are a couple of references. One major reference, which is this idea of like being rooted like a good word, right? So that's a Quranic metaphor, which I think is such a beautiful metaphor.
Can you explain it a little bit more?
Yeah, so I'm trying to remember my own lyrics, but what is it again? Well, it's I can tell you the reference. The reference is this beautiful ayah from Surah Ibrahim. Yes, that deals with this parable of a good word, good speech, being like a good tree that is firmly rooted and has its branches extending to the heavens. And I guess this song is kind of a reflection of what that metaphor meant to me, which doesn't mean that's like the only thing the metaphor. I feel like we're there by now, right? So it can have many meanings and it's beautiful and they're all true. But that's because to me it made sense in the sense of that these branches, then once you're firmly rooted, even if the winds keep coming, right? The lyrics of the song, even if the winds keep coming, if you're firmly rooted and your branches grow out, and one day the fruits will come off. I mean, the wind can keep blowing. It doesn't matter, because those seeds are going to fall and they're going to sprout and they're going to be rooted and they're going to grow branches and the fruits are going to fall, right? So as long as those roots stay in love, then, and whatever evil comes your way, you return it with what is better. I truly believe that that will make a lasting impact, if God wants it.
I have to thank you so much, because this has been, a better session than I could ever have imagined. I've learned so much, and I feel like it's been a bit of a religious experience, because what you shared it's so personal, but so deep and so, pertinent to every human being. And it just demonstrates to me the power of, not just music in the most, like superficially you hear something nice, it makes you feel good, but the layers of meaning, like the thought that went into it, even the knowledge, the understanding of, the tradition and the reflection of, like, okay, what does this mean for our relationship with the divine, our relationship with other people, for our relationship with ourselves. And integrating and synthesizing all of this deep, beautiful wisdom, bringing it back to God and the Quran, and, and then the music and your personal experience has just been such a wonderful experience. And, I know this is difficult to share, because it's, with any art, you get really vulnerable, but it means so much. And so I'm so grateful to you, and thank you for this time. Thank you. I think you can't hear these songs the same way after that. It just builds that relationship, and so it just makes this whole album even more spectacular and more meaningful. So thank you so much, and I really pray that this legacy that you'll leave behind will just grow tremendous arbors of fruit that will continue to sprout and grow and spread beauty and light everywhere, and and inspire people, because I think that's the inspiration. Even your discussion about inspiration, that's what we all need, and it's so beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you for being you. Thank you for your music. Thank you for everything. I can't wait to see how people respond to the album.
Thank you so much.